Now, Bose is discussing alcohol prohibition because he thinks that it mirrors current drug prohibition. In both cases, according to Bose, prohibition is a failure. It doesn't work. As we were just discussing, alcohol prohibition seems to have been a clear failure, and this is why prohibition of alcohol was repealed by the 21st Amendment. Bose thinks that current drug prohibition should be ended as well. He provides many facts and statistics to back up his point that the US has put a lot of effort into the war on drugs, into stopping the use and sale and manufacturing of drugs. I'm looking at a resource right now called the Drug Policy Alliance that may be honestly a little bit of a biased source. Um, but according to this Drug Policy Alliance, the amount spent annually in the US on the war on drugs is more than $51 billion annually. Okay, that's a lot of money that could be going toward perhaps a better, more worthwhile purpose. I think that's an idea, a statement that David Bose would support. Another interesting statistic provided by the Drug Policy Alliance is that the number of people arrested in 2013 in the United States on nonviolent drug charges was 1.5 million. 1.5 million people were arrested on nonviolent drug charges. And those were just the people who got caught. Presumably, there are many more people who are using these drugs in a nonviolent way and who aren't getting caught, right? The point being that even though we are spending $51 billion a year to prevent these people from using drugs in a nonviolent way, they continue to use these drugs, and some get caught, but presumably the majority do not. So why spend all that money if it's not actually working? The last interesting statistic here is that the number of people arrested for a marijuana law violation in 2013 was about 693,000. 693,000 people arrested for using a drug that is considered legal and probably moral by the majority of people here in Colorado. So all this is pointing to the fact that even though drugs are prohibited, people continue to use drugs. And perhaps you may know this from your own experience, perhaps not. But these drugs, though illegal, are still pretty readily available. Especially being a college student, you may be familiar with how readily available these drugs are. That doesn't mean you use these drugs or take advantage of these, how readily available they are. But just by being in the college environment, you may know how readily available they are or how widely used illicit drugs are. So even though there's prohibition, there continues to be use. Moreover, I think an important point that Bose makes is that prohibition of drugs creates financial incentives for criminals, for people who are willing to stay in the drug trade, in the drug business, even though those drugs are prohibited by law. I mean, think about it for a moment. Let's say, for whatever reason, the US government decided to prohibit coffee, right? Just because coffee's prohibited by law and it's not sold anywhere in stores legally like it is now, that doesn't mean people are going to stop wanting coffee. There will continue to be a demand for coffee, and presumably people will continue to buy coffee on a black market. Prohibition will create a black market as long as there's demand for an item, in this case coffee or drugs. As long as there's a demand, there will continue to be a supply, a market, and that market will either be legal or illegal, a black market. And when the item is prohibited, the market becomes illegal, a black market. So as long as people want coffee, or as long as people want cocaine or heroin or meth, there will continue to be a black market for that item, for that substance, right? And so you can imagine that if you could find coffee in no store and you could only get coffee from the shady, criminal who you just happen to know through somebody else, right? And he's saying, oh, I'm willing to sell you some coffee on the black market under the table. Don't let anyone know. I don't want to get caught by the police, right? But you have to pay $20 a pound for that coffee. What? $20 a pound? Yeah, you can't get this coffee just anywhere, right? So you're like, okay, I'll give you $20 a pound for the coffee because where else am I going to get the stuff? The same happens with other illicit drugs because you cannot find cocaine or heroin or in most states marijuana at your corner store or at a specialty store like a liquor store because that's not available, and you have to get the drugs through criminals, people who are willing to break the law to sell that drug or make that drug. The price of that drug goes up because it's less readily available. Consumers who want that drug are willing to pay, and therefore the criminals reap the reward. They get the reward of the higher price due to the prohibition. So again, I think this is an interesting point that prohibition of drugs, or for that matter, any item, whether it's alcohol or even guns or coffee, creates financial incentives for criminals. Of course, if we legalize these items, there are also financial incentives in the businesses that have now become legal, just like there's financial incentives in joining the business of alcohol, whether it's sale or manufacturing, etc. Nonetheless, these financial incentives become regulated and legalized and more formal. And there's no black market. Rather, there is a transparent, regulated market that is presumably safer as well. So again, Bose is just trying to point out that in all cases of prohibition, it seems it's bound to fail. It's bound to fail. Prohibition does not work.